Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Dark Matter Season 2, Episode 4, We Were Family. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Dark Matter, so I'll have to give a spoiler warning for Dark Matter up to Season 2, Episode 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So for the most part, I found this episode to be decidedly less interesting than the others this season. For the most part, it felt like an irrelevant aside that didn't really push the plot forward too much, but there were a few little interesting tidbits sprinkled throughout. So the episode begins with a sequence of 3 as a child when his parents were killed. Now, I know inevitably whenever I make comparisons to other shows, someone will say that I'm being unfair or ridiculous, but come on. I simply could not help but be overwhelmed while watching this scene with the unbelievable striking resemblance to the opening sequence of the Lost episode Confidence Man. Those who have seen Lost before must know what I'm talking about, as they had an episode in the first season that opened with a sequence that showed Sawyer as a kid where his parents were killed while he was hiding under the bed. Now, I know there are some differences, such as 3 was in a closet and not under the bed, and both of his parents were killed by another man, rather than Lost. Sawyer's father killed his mother and then killed himself, and the man in that scene didn't actually discover Sawyer hiding under the bed. But the way it was shot, the way it played out with the mother hiding the son somewhere and telling him it will be alright and to be quiet, and then dying off screen while she's screaming and that's all you can hear, and just the whole feel was exactly the same. I'm sorry, I do not care what anyone else says. This scene was a direct ripoff of that scene from Lost, and moreover, it was a worse version that, unlike the Lost sequence, it failed to hit its mark as it felt more of a cheap imitation. So then we get into 3's storyline where he meets his old crew, including the man who raised him. I found this storyline interesting as we learned his backstory, and I do think it makes him come off as a more well-rounded, more believable character. Because 3 has always been my least favorite character on the show, as he just came off as two-dimensional tough guy obsessed with his guns. But I think this episode goes a long way to making him more believable, and you can buy that he would turn out the way he did because of his backstory. Plus you see the more sympathetic side of his character. However, barring that, I actually was not a fan of this storyline. For one thing, it was very predictable, as I guessed very early on that Larkin Tanner had killed his parents and wasn't a friend who had avenged their deaths, as he claimed. That was pretty obvious from the beginning. In addition, I just didn't really buy his old shipmates or whatever they did. They came off really cliched, and I know that, I knew that he'd have a falling out with them. Plus, it was so convenient that they, the score that they wanted him to go on just so happened to involve a kidnapping, with Tanner kidnapping the son and looking after a child in the same way that he did with 3 when he was a child. And at the end, where he was like, come on kid, let's take you home. I suppose he neglected to mention that his father was dead. Details. Overall, I didn't really buy this whole storyline. It didn't really feel really fleshed out, and was just stereotypical with really no dynamic. However, I did enjoy more of the other storylines in this episode, particularly with the android, as she finds a group of human-like free androids that recognize something unique in her. These characters reminded me a lot of the show Humans, but not that I'm saying it was a ripoff, just that it was reminiscent. In fact, I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. In fact, I think it was actually a really good thing. It was an interesting dynamic to have a group of self-aware androids. I think it only adds shape and color to this universe, plus the revelation that there is more to the androids than meets the eye also helps expand her character, and now she has this upgrade that would make her more human-like, so that adds an interesting dynamic. So it will be interesting to see whether or not she uses it And if so, will it be a permanent change? But either way, it makes me really excited to find out what they're going to do with the storyline next. So we learn a bit more about the new arrivals with the Doctor, as Tu seems to want him to stay on board, which makes a lot of sense, as having someone with medical training would be really beneficial to them. But then we learn that he has a drug problem, which may cause some issues down the road. And the storyline with Arex was really interesting, as we learned what the corporate lady was referring to as her asset, and it wasn't specifically 5, but something that she had, the key card that she swiped that got her in trouble and her friends killed in the first place. Turns out it's some advanced piece of technology that could be the key to winning a war. I am really glad that they touched on this storyline again. Just one of the many reasons that prove to me that this show is well thought out and they're not just making shit up as they go along. So Arex takes it upon himself to swipe the card from her, which seems simple enough. And when we got that scene with 5 bumping into him in a hallway and then hugging him, I was like, come on, it was so obvious that she was picking his pocket. He's pretty dense for not picking up on this. But what I didn't know at the time was how she knew he had stolen the card from her, but we later learned that she had surveillance on in her room and was able to see what he did, which again is a possibility Arex should have been aware of. He's not a particularly good thief. So now this makes things really interesting that the crew are aware that Arex is up to no good. Of course, they don't know the extent of it yet, but surely they will tend to find out more. So this will add another, interesting thing that could be, this makes me excited to see how this show will deal with this. And another thing I found interesting was that when 5 showed the recording of Arex breaking into her room to everyone, Nyx was there as well, which I suppose means they trust her now. I suppose she gained Tu's trust by helping her find out what that image she saw was, and it was quite impressive the way she manipulated that travel clerk. However, I don't know if that makes her particularly trustworthy. However, I do feel that she is worth being trusted and doesn't have any ulterior motives. I just think Tu's sudden change from locking her out of everything in the ship and now all of a sudden trusts her with her intimate secrets is a bit too sudden to be believable. And we get this fight scene with her and 4 where she's able to match him with no training with a weapon he had been training with his entire life. So this builds off the fact that she was able to hold her own in a fight against Tu, and because Tu is an artificially enhanced being, that shouldn't be possible. So there is most definitely something up with Nyx, and it seems to me she may not even be aware of it herself. I hope it isn't as simple as her being like Tu and her explanation is something entirely different, but either way it does add a really interesting element of intrigue to this show. So we also get the return of Six, as the Doctor successfully performs the surgery to save his life, which surprised me that it happened so soon, as I thought they'd play this out longer and not save his life until much later in the season. But I'm happy that they're going to reintroduce him into the crew, and I completely buy that Tu is willing to forgive him, as she realized that he was not being played and that he now sees the crew of the Raza as worth helping, as they all did bond in season 1. And for that matter, I'm glad that they keep touching on the fact that one was murdered and aren't just forgetting about it, because all 6 of them bonded in season 1, as they all went through the traumatic experience of losing their memories together, and they all had to depend on each other to get out of it. And judging by the preview for next week's episode, which looks awesome, they're going to actively seek revenge for his murder. I do think that they set up the storyline with his wife's murder in the first episode for a reason, and even though he's dead now, it doesn't mean they're going to simply let that storyline go, and I do believe it will end up having relevance for the surviving members. After all, 3 was the one who was framed for her murder, so I'm really excited to see where they take it from here. So my rating for We Were Family out of 10 is a 6 good. This is a case where the subplots were actually more interesting than the main plot, as I didn't really care for the main story about 3 reconnecting with his old crew, as I thought it was far too predictable and it felt rushed and wasn't particularly well executed. However, I did really enjoy seeing the android meet the other human-like androids and seeing them discover what Rex was up to, deepen the mystery with Nix, and to see the return of Six. All in all, I think it was a great setup that makes me more excited about the show overall, but as an episode itself, it was just okay. So that's it for my review of We Were Family. Be sure to check back here every week as I continue to review episodes of Dark Matter. Also be sure to check out my channel for many more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Mr. Robot, and more. And be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.